Well, I think the governor sacrificed Minnesota on the altar of his presidential ambitions.
Democratic Visions is handmade in Eden Prairie in Minnetonka by DFL Senate District 42.
Our guest is former U.S. Senator Mark Dayton. Mark is a distinguished public servant, having previously served as Commissioner of Energy and Economic Development under Governor Perpich and also having been elected State Auditor. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, Tim. Glad to be here.
Mark is a candidate for governor in the year 2010 election. I'd like to focus in on what I kind of view as the cataclysmic session of the legislature that just wrapped up here not too long ago. And in particular, Mark, I'd like to get your perspective on what you feel the governor's proper role should be in a tough economic time when the legislative session got underway and as it progressed to conclusion.
Well, I think the governor sacrificed Minnesota on the altar of his presidential ambitions, and he sacrificed our public schools and school children. He sacrificed students at our colleges and universities. He sacrificed people who are poor and on health care and need that, or they won't have any health care at all. Certainly the aid to the cities and counties, which then translates into higher property taxes for people, cuts in local police protection and fire. So, you know, across the board, and all primarily to protect the tax cuts that he and George Bush before him gave to the wealthiest people of this state. You know, it's just immoral that according to the Minnesota Department of Revenue, the wealthiest 10% of people in Minnesota pay only about 2/3 of their proportionate share in state and local taxes. I don't believe there should have been a tax increase for everybody. I don't believe that at all. But there should have been a tax increase for the very wealthiest people of Minnesota so that they would pay their fair share and that they would shoulder some of this burden. When I ran in 2000 against Senator Rod Grams, he was proposing a flat tax at the federal level. And we said, no, that's too reactionary. Well, that would be an improvement in Minnesota. We don't even have a flat tax where everybody pays the same percentage. If we had had a flat tax in Minnesota, we'd have $3.8 billion of additional revenues for the next biennium. But the governor, again, puts this fig leaf over protecting the wealthy and says, well, you know, if you want to raise $1 of taxes on the people that can afford it, then you're talking about raising taxes on everyone. That's just not true, or it wouldn't have to be true.
Do you think a Democrat can get elected in the state of Minnesota for statewide office espousing tax increases?
Well, not tax increases on everyone, no. But in fact, Governor Pawlenty is responsible for tax increases on almost everyone, property tax increases. I mean, almost everybody in Minnesota has seen, in fact, double-digit increases in their property taxes in the last few years. That's a regressive tax. That falls on the homeowners. That falls on renters who, you know, get the rent, increase passed on. So their fees, every fee for just about everything has been increased. So people have seen these hidden tax increases. They just haven't seen it at the state income tax level because the governor is protecting the wealthiest people of the state. I don't think everybody should have their income tax increase. I think just the wealthiest 10%.
The governor has embarked on a strategic ploy of proposing to un-allot, and looking into the un-allotment statute. Apparently it's been on the books since 1939, but it's only been used 3 times in the last 30 years. Do you have an opinion as to whether or not that's a power that the governor should exercise in these circumstances?
Well, I'm not a lawyer, Tim. You're better to answer that than I, but from my understanding, this would be so far beyond what was contemplated in the law that I think somebody certainly needs to test this in court and challenge it constitutionally, because this totally changes the balance of power and responsibility between a governor and a legislature. I was Commissioner of Energy and Economic Development under Governor Perpich back in 1986, and that was the second year of the biennium of the session. It was after they had adjourned, there was $20 million left in difference. I mean, here we're talking about $1.4 billion remaining for the governor to un-allot after he's shifted $1.8 billion in aid to our schools. So, I mean, they're using every gimmick conceivable to avoid the reckoning and, again, avoid a responsible resolution to this deficit, which would mean everybody shoulders their fair share of taxes.
Would you have been in favor of the proposal that Governor Pawlenty was pushing to, in effect, take proceeds from the tobacco settlement and securitize that and sell it off to raise money?
No, I think the legislature deserves a lot of credit for not taking that cop out and costing our children and our grandchildren $1.6 billion over the next 20, 30 years in order to raise $1 billion now. I mean, that's exactly why the Constitution of Minnesota requires a balanced budget, so that legislators and governors will have to make these hard decisions in the current fiscal situation.
Is there any one of the vetoes or the potential unallotments that really raises your ire as respects what the governor has done or intends to do?
Well, public education in Minnesota has been hurt badly in the last few years, and we are seeing now the first school district in western Minnesota operating on a 4-day school week. Other school districts are looking to follow suit. Here in the metropolitan area, I've been in any number of schools where the class size in the elementary grades is over 30 children. You can't reach kids with individual needs when you have that many children in a classroom. High school courses and extracurricular activities are being cut back, if not eliminated. I mean, what we're doing to our public schools is just terrible, and that's our future. These young people are going to be the future of our state.
And what are the people in Minnesota saying to you as you go around the state talking about your candidacy?
I think people are very worried. I think they recognize we're in a very different era now. Somebody said, we're used to economic cycles. This isn't a cycle, this is a reset, where you push a reset button and 4 million people in this country need to find work, and most of them are not going back to what they were doing before. And Minnesota's in the throes of that, yes, and people recognize that we are part of a national and even a global economic crisis. But 20 years ago, Minnesota's unemployment rate was consistently 2% or better below the national average through both good and bad economic times. So we were at the crest of the economic wave. Now we're down in the trough. We ranked 44th, 6th from the bottom among the states in employment growth in 2007. So we've gone from being one of the best job-producing states 20 years ago under Rudy Perpich as governor to being one of the worst job-creating states now. And that's why, again, these policies that were adopted by, a succession of Governor Carlson, Governor Ventura, Governor Pawlenty, and the support of the business community, and others say, well, if we're going to cut taxes on the rich and we're going to make this a better business climate, we're going to respond by creating more jobs, better jobs for Minnesotans. That hasn't happened. And if we don't change this direction of Minnesota profoundly in the next few years, I fear for the future of the state.
Well, I've heard it described that, Minnesota has sort of a structural deficiency in its budgeting process and shortfall between revenue and what it should spend. Do you believe that there's a structural deficit of that sort?
That's what the experts say, and that what has happened in this session, and the governor is pushing these issues down the road 2 more years, means that they're already talking about a $5 billion deficit for the following biennium, and without likely a fiscal stimulus from the federal government to offset a couple $1 billion of that. So, I mean, we have to look at both sides of the equation, the spending side and the revenue side. The governor says we can only look at the spending side, even though revenues have been falling. So, I mean, that's half the equation, but we've got to look at what could be done, as I said earlier, with shouldering the tax burden by the wealthiest people in Minnesota so that they're paying their fair share. And we need to create more jobs, because more jobs, better jobs, means you have additional revenues through more people being productive and working. So that combination is something we're going to have to do if we're going to have any kind of semblance of the state that we have had in the past. Because if we just gut public education, if we throw more and more people off of health care, if our highways become continually worse and our public transit falls farther behind, we're not going to have an economically competitive state.
I know that one of the hallmarks of your campaign, Mark, has been implementation of a universal health care system. How can we approach that problem given the present economic conditions?
Well, the ideal, Tim, would be that we have that done at the national level, and we'll see what President Obama puts forward, how the Congress responds. But the bottom line is we got to take health care dollars in this country and here in Minnesota and put them to work for people rather than for corporate profits.